Well, thank you, Chuck, so much for coming to talk with me. This is the first chapter of our textbook, and when I thought about who to invite to talk about the study of interpersonal communication, it was a really easy choice to invite you. I think about your Handbook of Communication Science, your role in human communication research, one of the premier journals for interpersonal communication research. It seemed as though getting a chance to hear your perspective on the field was a really valuable opportunity, so I really appreciate you coming. I'd like to start by asking you how you came to be a communication researcher and study, you study a lot of different topics, but what draws you to the study of communication?
First of all, very kind of you to invite me to come. Thank you, and really an honor to do this. And I came to communication through a kind of a backdoor route. I actually was an undergraduate major in psychology at the institution at which you were a professor, an administrator at Penn State, and a long time ago. And I studied the program, the psychology program at Penn State at the time was heavily oriented toward experimental psych, but I did take a course in social psychology, one class out of many psych classes, and I really found it interesting. And within that, I actually found the study of persuasion, communication and persuasion, very interesting. How you use communication to change people's attitudes and opinions. You have a chapter on that in the book, social influence. And but I didn't know about the field of communication at all at that time. I actually took Speech 200, which is I think public speaking is still offered there. Everybody in the university had to take it, and we all took it dutifully. And to make a long story short, I actually applied to graduate schools in psychology and got accepted. I wanted to go on, and I actually was very much interested in doing research. I really was. That's what I really wanted to be, was a researcher. And so my academic career that was cut short in terms of because of the military, and so I ended up being in the military for 3 years in the Army as a linguist, a Korean linguist, trained as a linguist in electronic intelligence operation in South Korea. And so during that time, I talked to several people about continuing in graduate school, and I talked about psychology and so on. Somebody mentioned communication, and so I applied to some communication programs, and this 2 weeks after I was out of the Army, I was in graduate school studying communication at Michigan State. So it was only by sheer accident of the conversation that I had with somebody in the service who put me onto this. And what the person said, which was really interesting to me, is that this field at that time was very much oriented toward the study of persuasion, the use of communication to change people's attitudes, change behaviors, and so on. So that really seemed to fit better for me than psychology, and so I stopped the whole pursuit of psychology and went into communication.
So some of the things that you've done, I think, for the field has really cemented a focus on theory and research and the usefulness of theory building. And certainly one of the things we're trying to do within our book is to make theory accessible to students and to try to demonstrate how understanding how things work can help people to be more effective in their personal lives, in their work situations, in all the variety of venues in which we use interpersonal communication. So what is your commitment to theory? Why is it so important?
Well, I think the problem, I don't want to go too far afield and give you the edge, but I think American society is a very practical society. It's just set up that way. People want results, and that's good. But there's another side to this, and that is understanding. And you see it clearly in medical research, and I think you also see it with communication. That the best treatments or cures for things come from a good, solid understanding of what's going on. So the way you're going to make big advances in cancer, in curing cancer, is by understanding the very basic processes that create the disease in the first place. And then you can intervene in a more sophisticated way into the genetics of the disease and modify it. without that theoretical understanding, you can go by trial and error and try different things and try different chemotherapies and so on. And you may get lucky, but solid understanding is really important for practice. So people tend to divorce theory and practice. When they hear the word theory, they seem to think, well, that's that abstract kind of hard to understand stuff. But I want practical things, and that the distinction is really not as stark as you might think. So, as Kurt Lewin once said, a famous psychologist, a long time ago, there's nothing so practical as good theory. So, if you can explain how something works, and how conflict works, or how many of the processes you talk about in the book, how negotiations work, how people form a self-identity, whatever the role communication is playing. If you have an explanation for that that is plausible, it's much easier to devise strategies for practical interventions into conflict or into whatever the problem happens to be, relational difficulties and so on. So if you understand, for example, at certain points in relationships there's going to be turbulence, and you understand that when this occurs, these are the things that are going on and why they're going on, it's a lot easier than to intervene to help people get over that than it is if you have no idea. You're seeing the symptoms, but you're not understanding what the underlying cause is. And it's true in the world in general that the more you understand and can explain what's going on, and you see something happening, something usually that's undesirable, like conflict or whatever, or which may not be undesirable, but if it is, then there's something constructive that you can do about it. And so
I think people come to think of communication and interpersonal communication as just being serendipitous or accidental, or and I think, as you point out, we have so many theories that help us to understand when and why things happen. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to have conflict in your life, and you're not going to have turbulence, you're not going to have uncertainty, but it's not as capricious and magical as it might seem. So hopefully what we can do is to teach people to anticipate and understand.
Well, the interesting thing is, you're absolutely right. I think that there's some sort of opposing things that go on here. One is that communication is complex, and it's very difficult to understand and chaotic. It's all sort of intuitive, so you can't possibly understand it on the one hand. On the other hand, linguists say that about 70% of the utterances that come out of people's mouths are formulaic. They're little formulas like, well, my opinion is, but, blah, blah, blah. We speak that way, and about 70% of discourse is very habitual. And so you have this sort of paradox of habit on the one hand, sort of simple habits to get things done is what we're doing. We're using communication to get things done. And so they're very useful habits, right? It's a very useful habit to have to get these things done, achieve these goals. But on the other hand, people sometimes think that it was a mysterious process and you really can't understand it. I think you can, but I think you have to be oriented not simply toward looking at outcomes or wanting to produce certain outcomes, but you have to understand why this is going on in the first place, why these things are happening, and then can I intervene in some constructive way to change the course of what's going on.
So Chuck, I'm interested, as you think about really the whole field of interpersonal communication, where you think there are some places where communication research has really offered some important applied insights and made some really important discoveries.
Well, there's a lot. A lot of areas. We were talking. You're talking about social support. The people in many different kinds of professional roles, counselors and so on, and even in just ordinary sort of relationships, everyday relationships. Have tragedies that occur in their lives, emotionally and so on, physically, and they need support. And there's a lot of, as you know, literature that shows that people who get good support actually do experience better outcomes physically. Then you can demonstrate that than people who don't get good social support. So there's no question that the provision of social support is really important to helping people who are having difficulties of one kind or another. And then we have the people in our field who've done a lot of work trying to figure out what constitutes effective versus ineffective social support, and we know a lot about that. This starts getting into areas like applied areas such as marital counseling, marital interaction, dealing with people who have illnesses, health communication. So there's a lot of very practical implications that flow out of the work on social support. Similarly, with conflict work, we were talking about the idea, that people used to talk about a long time ago conflict resolution, as if there is an end to conflict, and as we all well know, that label's going away. It's now conflict management, and so we've come to recognize that in any relationship, as you point out in the book, in any relationship, you're going to have some conflict. The best intentions of people in relationships, conflict's a given. So it's not a question if you're going to have conflict. The question is, when are you going to have it, and then what are you going to do about it when it happens? And the principles that people have been able to articulate about how people deal with conflict, and I know you're going to talk to Mike Roloff soon, and he'll talk more, I guess, about this. But that literature has been applied in areas where conflict is occurring in relationships like this. But also, it gets into very high stakes situations like ethno-political conflict, stuff that like Don Ellis works on, and people like that, where you're dealing with conflicts that are occurring between, say, Israeli people in Israel and Palestinians and so on, seemingly intractable conflicts in the Mideast and that kind of thing. So these principles are powerful in the sense that they can be used to deal with conflict at interpersonal levels, but they can also be deal much of international conflict, interethnic conflict, and those kinds of things. I think there's very similar processes are going on. They're not identical, but there are certain principles that help with conflict management. And again, we're only going to manage it. And I think we come to appreciate, I think, more fully that any encounter between people, and even people who seemingly should know each other well, has some level of uncertainty associated with it. And so as a communicator, you're always, when you're going to say something to somebody or act in a particular way towards somebody, faced with the issue of the degree to which you really know their state at that time. So even somebody you, quote, know well, you don't know completely. And that's impossible. And so the next question is then, well, where are they with respect to what it is I want to talk to them about? My mother used to say, when you talk to somebody, always remember that you don't know what they've experienced just before this conversation you're going to have. They may have found out that a family member was killed in a car accident, right? You don't know that. And so you tracking where people are emotionally at a given point in time, even people, again, you're close to, is a somewhat more difficult task than we like to believe it is. I mean, we interact in a routine fashion, assuming that a person is the person we're talking with is in a particular state, psychological state. May not be the case.
Right. So, Chuck, one last topic to address here. I'm wondering what kind of advice you have for the students in this course who are just embarking on their study of interpersonal communication, as far as what they might take from this class as they pursue future careers, what insights ought they bring from this class and as they think about their own personal lives and going forward from here.
Well, certainly it's one thing about studying communication, which is I think a lot of fun, is that it's all around you. You really can't avoid it. You're doing it every day in one way or another. Even if you don't say anything to somebody, chances are then you're going to communicate non-verbally with them. And so you have the opportunity to, while you're taking a class like this, and then hopefully when you're done with it, you have the opportunity to, while you're studying it, to observe it. It's not like taking classes in microbiology where you can only go into a lab somewhere and look through a microscope and see bacteria or whatever it is. Your laboratories, your everyday life. Okay, so that's really a wonderful aspect of this. And I actually find myself, I get ideas for doing research really mostly by observing things around me, how people interact, how they respond to each other. That's a great source of data. Now, that's not answering your question about, what they can do with a communication degree. That's a real difficult one to answer, except that I think that this is a great preparation for any number of things endeavors that you might, take on once you graduate from university. In addition to, serving as a launching pad for a career in studying communication, going to graduate school in communication, the skills and so on, and the insights that you can acquire about communication from this book and other, and other courses you might take in communication will serve you well in any number of jobs. In terms of social influence is integral to things like sales and anything that has to do with persuasion, law. And so being effective in those kinds of jobs and doing well in them is critically dependent on the knowledge you have of how people work and how communication works. And if you're going to be using it for persuasion or for comforting, if you find yourself become interested in a career in counseling or some helping profession, social work, whatever, vital, absolutely vital. And so there's just many endeavors that it's important. Teaching, if you can't communicate well in the classroom, then by definition you're not a good teacher. No matter how well versed you are in your subject, if you can't communicate it in a way to students that is interesting and clear, then you're going to fail, no matter how competent and how much you know. You can't get it into a format, into messages that are understandable and that students will take seriously. So, almost every endeavor that I can think of in life, almost, if you're a parent, someday if you're going to be a parent, communicating with children becomes really important. Parents who can't communicate with their children well are going to have problems. The kids are going to have problems. The parents are going to have problems. And so it's vital in so many different aspects of life that it's just, to me, it's sort of a no-brainer that this kind of taking classes like this, and especially in this area, is really important. I mean, one thing that sort of bothers me a little bit is that people, when they talk about communication now, immediately jump to thinking about technology,
right.
Facebook and mobile devices and Twitter and so on. That's communication.
I was going to ask you how you saw social media changing what we do.
Well, I mean, in a sense, it is. In a sense, it does. In a sense, but I'm not persuaded. I think there's there are a lot of basic principles of interpersonal communication that apply whether you're on Facebook or you're talking to someone face to face. Now, it's true that you can do things with these media. Put up pictures, deceptive pictures. You can. I could put up a picture of George Clooney and say it's Charles Berger. I could do it, but nobody believes. Right? So you can do that. I can't. I could walk around with a George Clooney face, and in front of me, in a face-to-face interaction. It wouldn't work very well. But the point is that I think a
really
lot of the
just impression
principles.
management in a different form.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah, but it's true. But I mean, it's these principles, I think, transcend the medium. I mean, to some degree. Now, there are things you can do on media, as we were talking about, deception and stuff like that, things that you can do more easily than you may be able to do face to face. But I still would argue that the things that you talk about in the book, like reciprocity and these phenomena, are not only happen in face-to-face interaction, they happen whether on the internet or whatever, email. I don't care what the modality is. Modality makes a difference, but I still think there are fundamental principles of interpersonal social interaction that apply. And so, even amongst academics, I find sometimes that there's the level of hyperbole about technology is almost sounds like advertising copy. And our role, I think, as academics should be one of being somewhat more skeptical. I mean, that's what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to raise questions. We're supposed to be that way. And so there ought to be there may be cheerleaders. It's okay to have some cheerleaders, but I think there ought to be some skeptics. Where especially when it gets into the area of making claims about, well, this is going to fundamentally alter the shape of interpersonal communication or social interaction in some fundamental way. I'm not saying it won't. It doesn't. Don't get me wrong. I think it makes a difference, but the question is how big a difference. And sometimes, even if there's a difference, it doesn't really make a difference. Because you can do X on the medium, whereas you can't do it in face-to-face very easily, or vice versa. So what?
It doesn't change the importance of questions about culture, about perception, about self-identity, about language, nonverbal communication, conflict support.
This would be the equivalent of saying, well, some people in the world, in the Western world, sit at a table and eat. Okay, other people in the Far East sit on the floor and eat. Now, this must make a fundamental difference in the way they digest food.
Right.
Well, it's silly. If it's a difference, of course it's a difference, right? Yeah. So what? I mean, it does, and I'm not saying, I wouldn't go so far as to say, with technology, it's so what. But I would say that I think it's overly blown. I also think sometimes, though, the cultural, and you mentioned this in the book, the cultural differences are overblown. The human condition worldwide is the human condition. We're all faced with dealing with a certain set of fundamental things that have to be done. We deal with them differently. That's where the cultural modulation is. But the fact of the matter is that the problems, the goals that have to be achieved, or the problems that have to be solved, are very similar. And so we sometimes overemphasize differences, and we don't emphasize similarities. And some people suggest that the reason we do that is the way we study it, because we use different statistics. We compare Group A with Group B, and so you're bound to find, well, eventually you'll find a difference, maybe by chance. But how often do we approach the study by saying, but what about, let's look for similarities.
Right.
Let's look for similarities just as intensely as we're looking for differences.
So maybe a different question to ask as we move into an era where technology facilitates interpersonal communication isn't how is this transforming, but what are the things that are not changed?
Right.
And so an exciting question going to the future is how interpersonal communication adapts and adjusts and doesn't really change fundamentally.
Right. As
we see these kind of technological advances.
Right, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. Thanks,
Bowie,
Jeff.
I endorse it.